Hi, this is Stu, and welcome to our little series, Stretching for Yoga. And this time we're looking at the front of the hip. So whenever we're doing any of these sorts of lunge type positions, we're going to need, maybe if it's easier if I change my legs, you're going to need some opening across the front of the hip, and we will use this lunge in a little sec to access this area. Whenever we're doing back bends, it might be Ustrasana, that we're wanting to open the front of the body. We need some extension. It's called extension of the hip here. If it's a full drop back, if it's Urdhva Dhanurasana, we're looking for opening across the front of the hip. Yeah? And again, we say a lot of these postures involve complex movements. Sometimes you're tight in the shoulders as well, and you're trying to get up and you're trying to access the front of the hip, but you're so occupied with your shoulders. So again, the idea is let's do some separate work on opening the front of the hip, and then you can enjoy some of your postures in the actual flowing practice as you go through it. So we also need to think about the muscles that cross the front of the hip that may be influencing our ability to extend the hip. Yeah? So the two main ones deep inside here are the psoas and the iliacus. Yeah? So they're going to be crossing the front of the pelvis and attaching to the inside of the femur. They attach to a place called the lesser trochanter of the femur, which is slightly on the inside upper thigh. Yeah? So they also have the consequence that when you're going into these lunges, that you may see that your hip tends to roll out, like this. If it's rolling out, basically you're escaping out of the stretch. Yeah? If you notice that when you're doing drop backs that your feet turn out, that might also be an indication that you're trying to escape out of the front of the hip. Yeah? So another indication that you might want to go ahead and do some of these hip openers, because it's going to take some of the strain away from the back. Because what you can't open in the hip and you're doing a back bend, you're going to try and make up for in the back itself. So the more movement we can have here, the less movement we have to have here, which is a much better idea. Okay, so what we've got to think of is we've got this psoas, we've got the iliacus, but in fact, actually anything that crosses the front of the hip might influence our ability to extend at the hip. Now, of course, a lot of back bends are full body, front body openers, so we're not thinking about necessarily the front of the abdomen, which we'll need to lengthen, the shoulders and everything in this particular little video. All we're thinking about is this area here, the front of the hip. So, but we also have another muscle that crosses the leg. Now, one of the quadriceps, it's called rectus femoris, also crosses the knee. Yeah, so it's a knee extensor, so it does this action like the other quadriceps, but it also crosses the front of the hip as well, so its job is also the ability to flex the hip, So it will resist when we try and take our hips backwards. So we're also going to try and get into that particular muscle as well, And you might find that when you're doing postures with a bent knee, which also involve hip extension, maybe something like Kapotasana, that this particular muscle might be the main one that restricts you, rather than the psoas. So it's worth having a look at both of these muscles, or groups of muscles. So let's think about the first exercise that we're going to start with. And we're going to use, again, we're going to come back to our little idea of this PNF. And so we'll put together a little sequence for you to try and access some of the extension at the front of the hip. So just a reminder that the PNF involves some contraction first of the muscles that you're going to try and relax, and then a period of relaxation, and then a repetition of normally 3 times. Okay, so we're going to start with our lunge, and depending on how delicate your knees are and how thick your mat is, you might want something for your knee to be on, okay? And then what you're going to do is you're going to go into your quite deep lunge, and you want to look at your back foot, make sure that it's in line with the rest of your thigh. Okay, you want to make sure that your knee is tracking in line with your ankle and that your pelvis is fairly neutral. Now, depending on how tight you are here, there will be a tendency, if you're very tight, for your pelvis to tip forwards. But what you want to do, and then you might take it up in the back. So sometimes people fool us. We think, wow, they're open in the hips, but actually in this particular movement, extension, but actually they're not. what they're doing is their pelvis is tipping forward, but they're making up for the rest of it with some extra extension in the back. So we really want to be drawing up on the front of the pelvis and pressing down with the back of the pelvis. Okay, and this is our starting position. And we want to be nice and high. Yeah, we can place our hands on our leg here, or we can actually place them on our bum and just encourage our hips forwards a little bit. So with all these exercises that we're doing, we're just encouraging. We're never going to be forcing, all right? So from that position, now we want to start our PNF. And what we do is we imagine that we're going to slide this knee forward to join the one at the front. I'm not pushing down, I'm going to draw it forwards. So I'm contracting these muscles on the front of my hip to draw that knee forwards. But the friction on top of my green t-shirt and the floor will stop my knee coming forward. So from this position, I'm nice and high. I'm going to just draw my knee forwards. Now I'm working, you can't see it of course because there's no movement, but I'm actually working, again, 20 to 30% effort. That's all we need to do. Okay, and you'll feel it quite intensely on the front of the leg that's going behind. So really about here, okay? And then once you've done about 4 or 5 breaths, staying nice and high, then you're just going to sink a little bit. And then you're going to repeat. For sort of 5 breaths. That would be a quick 5 breaths, wouldn't it? So I just better keep it going for a little bit longer. And then we're going to sink again. All the time, pulling the pelvis up at the front, pushing it down at the back. I might place my hips here. Good, and then pulling again. And then relaxing. Now that very much targeted the front of the hip here, but more around the psoas and the iliacus. Now if I want to get this rectus femoris that also crosses the knee, I need to actually flex the knee as well. So the best thing to do is just come up a little bit out of your lunge and then get hold of your foot. Yeah? Now if you can, it's much nicer to get hold of it with both hands because then you're nice and symmetrical, and bring your heel towards your bum. Now you want to, if you can, keep it on your bum as you then lunge forwards. So now you'll feel the stretch change and you'll feel it on the front of that thigh. And this really is quite nice and intense. Good. And then you hold it. Maybe you choose to hold this one for 10 breaths because we're just chilling out here. Yeah, and when you've done your 10 breaths, you might relax. Place that foot down. And now what we want to do is access also a little bit of the front of the body. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw this leg back so it's a little bit closer, and then send the knee over the front of the ankle. Now those of you a little bit anatomically minded might say, hold on a minute, I didn't think the knee was meant to go over the front of the ankle. In this situation it's okay because our weight is going to be going backwards. So I'm just going to check my back foot's okay again. Then I'm going to lift up here and create as much length as I can. I'm reaching towards the ceiling, and then I'm trying to keep that length as I then start to go backwards. Yeah, and now I should feel it quite nicely here again. Yeah, and from that position, I'm just going to bring my head back so I can actually talk, not break my neck. From that position, you can then try and draw your front leg and your back leg together, but of course not letting them move. So from this position, I would be here, and then I would be activating. Yeah, and that again makes it a little bit more intense, and then I can relax. The main thing I don't want you to do is hinge here. So it's not about just folding in half and letting your back take the work. It's about what is happening at the front of the hip. So I really want you to feel it across the front of the hip here. Good. And of course then, once you've done that, you've hung out there for a little while, then you would swap legs and do it on the other side. Okay? And you'll find that this will really help your postures like the splits, as I say, your back bends, loads of postures that involve that extension of the hip. Now, there's another one that we can do, which is quite good for opening up again the front of this quadricep. And this is with the same thing against the wall. Now, you're going to want some sort of padding for your knee to rest on. And sometimes, depending on how open you are on the front of your shin and your ankle, you might want some padding for the wall as well, because it can be a little bit hard. Go very gently with this exercise, because it might be that some people's knees just don't like it. In which case, of course, you don't want to find out afterwards that that wasn't the posture for you. So just try it for a little short time first and then come out. Okay, So it's a little bit tricky to get into this one, and I found that the easiest way is to get into it from high and then slide back down into it. So you're thinking, yeah, but what the hell is he talking about? So I'll just show you, and that'll make sense, okay? So we back up towards the wall, yeah? Then I'm placing my hands on the floor, taking my leg up the wall, and now my whole shin is touching the wall, and I slide my knee down the wall until it touches the floor. Then I move that leg forward, because that's going to balance me. Now this you might find is quite an intense stretch on the front of the quadriceps here, yeah, and also a little bit across the front of the hip. Now we don't want this heel to drift out too far, because it's either going to mean that you're rotating this knee in too much, or that you're torquing the lower leg relative to the upper leg. So you want to be careful not to take it out too far, but at the same time, if you can, you want to take your bum back towards the wall. But of course, the forces at play are going to mean that your knee is going to want to slide away from the wall. So you've got to make sure that that doesn't slide away, or you're going to lose some of the stretch across the front. So from there, you can just sort of, if you can, settle back against the wall. And then if you feel really brave, you can actually reach your arms up the wall. And then just breathe. You can see that actually in these camera lights, I'm already sweating just from holding this here. So I do apologize if I look rather disgusting in this short video, but we are in India. And so from there, what you want to do is keep pushing your hips back against the wall and feeling it in the front of the thigh. Now, when it comes to change around, I would feel inclined to just come forwards, get yourself out of it nice and gently, because that's the time you need to be careful in these transitioning movements in and out, and then go back into it with the other leg. So I'll just show you one more time on the other side, just so as you can get into it. So we just start maybe standing quite close to the wall, one leg up the wall, slide it down the wall, and then take this leg forward so you're going to be able to balance, and then sit yourself up, yeah? And you might find one side is a little bit easier than the other, or a little bit tighter than the other. Good, and then you do the other bits that we did. Okay, so that was looking at opening the front of the hip for hopefully to help your back bends, your splits, all that sort of stuff. So what I look out for in yourself is the movement coming from the hip, or am I also getting a little bit stuck there and taking it into the back? And it's those people that are very mobile in the back that tend to have real difficulty in stabilizing the low back in order to work into the pelvis. And so the same thing you'll see in their splits is that their pelvis will be pointing away like this, but they can still sit upright because they take it into the back. But really, they'd be better to come up a little bit, work on the extension of the hip, and take less in the back. So just analyze your own postures, try and figure out what it is you're doing, and you might then benefit from some of this front of the hip opening, we could call it. Good. Okay, hope that helped, and see you for the next one.